Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, many parents believe that raising a hand to your child is part of growing up. But does it discipline them or simply leave scars? So we're digging deep into our childhood memories for this show. Malika Bilal is our digital producer. Online, what stories are being shared?
There are so many stories, and some of them are actually hard to read. Others are a little bit funny.
Okay.
But I will say that public opinion on this is split and among should you reprimand your child by hitting them or should you not? So Moy on Twitter says, I personally was spanked as a child by my dad. I don't hate him, but his fear is still in me at age 21, though we live an ocean apart. And on the other side of the spectrum, Abdul Malik says, I'm proud my parents spanked me. It made me a better person. Without that spank, I would have been someone else. So we want you to share your stories as well. Do so using the hashtag AJStream.
I'm Leia Aroni. I'm a business coach, a mother of 6, and I'm in the stream.
For many, spanking your child is essential to discipline, but for others, it's a tool that inflicts emotional and physical pain. Whether it's using your hand, a paddle, or even a belt, more than 85% of US adults were spanked by a parent. Corporal punishment in the home is legal across the United States and is even permitted in schools in 19 states. Some laws don't explicitly prohibit the use of a closed fist, while others permit the use of a switch, and that's a type of thin branch. So although a lot of research shows that spanking has a negative psychological impact on the child, many parents still see it as a necessity. Joining us to discuss this via Skype from Greenville, South Carolina, we have Paul Thomas, Associate Professor of Education at Furman University. Robert Lazalia is a Professor of Human Development and Family Science at Oklahoma State University. In Atlanta, Georgia, LaShawn Williams is a writer and social commentator. And in the studio in Chicago, Illinois, we have Asada Kirkland, author of the book Beating Black Kids, and she also conducts parenting workshops. So good to have you here in the mix, everybody. I'm intrigued about your spanking experience. So Asada, what was the worst spanking, beating, smacking you ever got in your life?
I mean, I only really got 2 spankings and a slap, so it's not like an extensive experience, but I will say that the spankings came from incidences where I was being fresh or nasty, as you could say, and what should have followed wasn't a spanking, but more so, why is that young girl doing those things that are inappropriate for her age? And so I don't remember the beatings, but I see what they created in me as a woman and not handling that at that age.
What's being fresh? One person's fresh is another person's sort of, lots of personality and character. What do you mean by being fresh?
Oh, good question. So being nasty, I'll use the word nasty, is like writing letters that are quote unquote pornographic for a young person to write.
Yikes.
And I should not have known, I should not have known about such sexual things at such a young age. We're talking about like first grade here. And so if you see a young child doing something, yes, a spanking, don't do it again, that's one thing, but then what about what created it in the first place, which was a molester? You know, so it's like if you spank, you don't get to the real root of the problem, and so that's the issue with that.
Sure. LaShawn, with you, your experiences of being disciplined as a youngster, can you remember being spanked? I've actually created smacked and spanked. I've made them one word. Can you remember being hit as a child?
I can. It was mostly for things, my parents had spankable offenses, so something like lying. I remember lying when I was younger, and I was spanked for that. I could probably count on one hand the number of times I was spanked. My parents never slapped me or anything. It was always just on the bottom. But for me, it wasn't a negative experience. I don't look back and say that they should have done anything differently. It was cause and effect. You know, if you lie, that's a poor choice. Poor choices have consequences. This one was a spanking.
So you never lied ever again after getting a spanking?
No, actually, not really. I think I got better at it.
Yes.
when I did.
Develop your skills.
But I really wasn't. I was actually a pretty good kid, and I didn't want my parents to be put in the position where they couldn't trust me.
Right.
And, you know, the way that they handle those things changes over the years. When I was 5, I received a spanking for lying. When I was 13, I lost privileges.
You know, Paul, LaShawn talked about spankable offenses, and so online people are sharing their own spankable offenses. Aris says, one night I stole a piece of meat. The backhand slap deafened my right ear for weeks. I still hate meat to this day. But that person then went on to say, I still believe that the spanking and corrections we got as kids gave us the little sanity left in this generation. So Paul, were you spanked, and what were your spankable offenses?
Right. Yes, I was raised spanked with a belt, which seems extremely harsh now. At the time, it seemed normal. There was also the threat of being spanked. My sister and I both lived with "wait till your father gets home," which I think was so the spankings I think were bad enough, but it was always that sort of that threat. A lot of it had to do with being disrespectful. We were also raised that children were to be seen, not heard. So a lot of it was about doing as you were told. And in general, I would say I had a wonderful childhood and excellent parents. And for me, those spankings tarnish what was otherwise a really wonderful childhood. And I think it was regrettable that that was a part of it. I would say being raised in the American South, this was just culturally normal. It's also quite normal still, which I think is pretty surprising to some people.
Sure. And for you, Robert, I know you've got youngsters. Did you basically do what was done to you as a youngster to your children? Do you use the same kind of disciplinary methods, did you?
Well, my father used a paddle, and I just used my open hand. And the way I did it was with my own children was compatible with the best research that shows that if you, of course, like any discipline tactic, it depends upon how it's used. And so I did what I call backup spanking. That is, you ask, well, the way I did it was I would count to 3, and that way I would spank them if I got to 3 and they still didn't cooperate. Now, what that did was then I was free to let them really be children, but when I was serious about, well, I need you to cooperate now, then I could count to 3, and they would almost always cooperate just before I got to 3.
Wow. So let's give us an example of something where you'd count to 3, 4. What kind of naughtiness would you start to count?
Well, it could be a variety of things. It could be just the normal things of the day where, let's say we have to go somewhere and it's time for them to get ready to go in the car. Now, maybe, of course, they're doing their thing, but my wife and I say, well, this is really important. We have to get you to school on time or to meet your bus. And so I'd ask them a couple times and try to do the preventive things. And of course, some days, like all parents, we would do that better than others.
And your tone of voice would be what, Robert? How would your tone of voice change when you started your count?
Well, but I want a clear instruction. So if I'd asked them several times and they still weren't coming and it was really important, then I would say 1, 2, and then I would get action. Usually when I was taking my breath for 3, then they would get their act together and come on to the car so we could make the bus on time so they wouldn't miss it.
Would you start doing 2 3/4 so you didn't hit a 3?
What?
Would you do like a 2 1/2, 2 3/4? No, you just went straight to 3.
Now my wife counted to 10.
Yeah.
So that didn't do anything until she got to 9.
Okay. All right. I have to admit, I'm scared right now, and I would do whatever you asked me to do by the time you got to 2. You did mention.
That was the idea. That way I didn't have to spank them very often.
Yeah. Okay.
I had a clear signal that now this is really important.
Right.
And I tried not to overuse that, but when it was really important, then I tried to use it, and that way, if I was frustrated at that point, then I never got more frustrated, so I wasn't in danger of doing things that are more harmful to children, such as yelling at them, using verbal hostility, or which I tried never to do, or use more severe kinds of spanking if you get really frustrated.
All right, so Robert, you did mention paddling. Let me just show from a website that we found called corporal.com, so corporalpunishment.com. Now, I can't tell you exactly where this is, and I can't verify the video, but you can see what a paddling in America actually looks like. Take a look at this. So, Sade, as you're watching that, you're shaking your head. Why does this upset you? There are about 19 states right now, exactly 19 states in the US that allow this to happen in school.
Well, I'm shaking my head. I don't even have to see it. I could just hear it. But the fact that it's occurring, I have something I say is that raise your skills and not your hands to discipline our children, because that child is going to become an adult. And the memory you're leaving in them, the marks that are physical you're leaving in them, the mental anguish that you leave in the children, it shapes who they become as adults. And it's a very skillless happening. And the fact that it happens in schools is very problematic. As a parent, I absolutely would not, I have a zero tolerance policy for that. And they definitely would not go to hit my child. One, because I don't even hit her. I'm her biggest fan. But the point is that as an adult, hitting someone that's younger than you, smaller than you, one shouldn't happen. But more than anything, it shapes the person into a person we may not want. And we complain a lot about young people now. But what we're complaining about, we helped create some of that by showing them that violence gets you a result when they're little. And so they grow up into young adults who use violence to get what they want. And we showed it. So why do we have a problem with gang violence and the rest of it if in fact we helped to set the foundation for that?
See, what's interesting is that both Paul and Robert were shaking their heads. Let me go to Paul first of all. Paul, what did you want to add?
Well, I think it's really important to point out that there is a research base, and it's a very long research base, that corporal punishment can be extremely harmful. But I think it's also important to point out that there are other ways of disciplining children that are more effective. And the average person, how do they know where the line is? And so I think even though there are some people that advocate for moderate or mild corporal punishment, which I do not agree with, I don't know how many people are qualified to know where that line is. Also, watching the video, if an adult struck another adult like that, it would not be tolerated. And it really baffles me that when we move to an adult and a child, how we somehow can justify a grown, larger person striking a powerless child when we will not allow that, and we shouldn't allow it between two adults.
Well, LaShawn, there's someone here online that agrees with what Paul was saying and says, imagine a giant coming at a small child to physically hurt them. It's the most terrifying feeling even before the pain comes. But LaShawn, someone else on Twitter references another point that Paul made about the line. And Kadzika says there is a significant difference between spanking a child from time to time in case of serious misbehavior and domestic violence or abuse. Where do you draw that line for your own children? You have 3 children, right?
I do have 3 children, and I do think there is a difference between spanking and beating or, just hurting a child. I think spankings are done purposefully. They're done in a controlled environment. They're done in a way that, I think as the doctor said earlier, before a parent gets extremely frustrated. It's used as a tool of discipline, and I don't see that as a giant beating onto someone smaller. I think that it's more so of just, it's another disciplinary tactic. It's another way to get some children that require that to understand that there are negative consequences for negative choices.
I would love us to clear discipline, because discipline, we're using it a lot to describe hitting children. And this is not directly to you, LaShawn, but it's to just all of us, because I've heard it and it's personally. And discipline has the same etymology as disciple. It comes from disciplina. It's Latin. Exactly. It means to teach. It means to teach. So we need to be teaching our children, but hitting them has nothing to do with disciplining them at all. And the body experiences pain the same exact way, whether it's a spanking, popping, hitting, whooping, beating, where we intellectually say those terms, but the body is experiencing pain and the child is wincing to the blow of a parent or an adult. And so those are the things that don't have definitions. It's just what they felt. For all the people out there who say, well, I'm glad I got those beatings. That's not what you were saying when you were a child. You're saying that now. But when you were getting it, you were totally thinking something else, and it involved resentment, sadness, confusion. And I want us to be aware of that, because that's what we need to handle.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't have any resentment for my parents. I didn't when they spanked me as a child. I've spanked my children, and I haven't seen any resentment there. I think that we have to separate the difference. We continue to use the term hitting when you're referencing spanking, and they are two different things.
So, LaShawn, as a kid,
slapping your child.
See, LaShawn, as a kid, I would get whatever the word is that we decide to use. My mum and my dad would hit me, okay, or spank me, or whatever. There would be a cane. I'd have to get the cane, and then they'd whack me with it. I hope my mum's not watching right now. So that's what they would do. So does it really matter what we call it? Because I still had the same amount of pain. Why does it matter how we describe the word?
The intention behind it is different.
Right.
I think when there are parents who do hit their children, they hit them out of anger, they hit them out of frustration, and when someone is spanking their child, there's a completely different mindset behind it. There's a completely different way that it is delivered to the child, and I think that, for someone who disagrees with it, the people who disagree with it don't really see that. They're seeing extremes and not really the middle ground, where there are people who are able to spank their children in a very purposeful manner.
But see, there's an intention of the adult, but then the child's real feelings is the issue. The adults have an intention,
but every child
on what they don't or want to do. But and that's what we need to get the feedback from children. Sure, but we need to get the feedback from the children to see what they actually feel when they're getting hit. Now that would clear the air.
That would, but as a parent, it's your job to figure out what works and what doesn't work for your child. For some children, timeout works. Other children, spankings work.
All right, ladies, hold tight for a moment. I just want to bring the gentleman back in. Paul?
I was just going to say that one thing that concerns me is even if there's such a thing as mild spanking, and we don't call it hitting, because I've had several people that want to make that distinction, the only way that corporal punishment can work is if it's painful and if it creates fear. And I don't think there's degrees of pain and fear that are acceptable. So either you're striking a child at a level that there's no pain, therefore there's no fear, then it's completely ineffective. So that part of it, I understand people get upset and don't want to call it hitting. That's fine. But any striking of a child that creates pain and fear, I think, is ineffective. And I think there are more effective ways, and I would agree with the earlier comments, that we should find more effective ways that are in fact teaching them something so that there are real consequences. And I would say healthier consequences so that could carry over into their adult lives.
Well, I just want to weigh in here with this from I hear you, Robert, but I just want to share this view on this topic. Julianne on Facebook writes in, as a parent, I will let you in on something. Spanking is all about parental catharsis. It's nothing about discipline. That's what this person says. So, Robert, I know you wanted to get in, but before you speak, I know that you told our producers ahead of the show that your son remembers a time when he was spanked when he was younger. What did he tell you about that time?
Well, as I said, both of our children think fairly highly of us as parents, similar to what the one guest said, and but that doesn't mean I was a perfect parent all the time. So the most negative thing I remember from my children's recollection of spanking was when I came home and I think my wife had spanked my son, and she was very upset, and I wanted to defend my mother, or the mother of my children. And so I went in and I spanked him again. Now, I think I should have handled that differently, because he did remember that as the worst day of his childhood. And so that's an example. Again, the emphasis is on, for every discipline tactic, we have to distinguish between how it can be used most appropriately and when it should be an option, and distinguish that from the kinds of things that have been emphasized here, where it's overly punitive and produces unnecessary fear. Now, I think there are apparently people raised in Sweden where I wish those boys had more fear, because the rate of rapes of children at the age of 15 in Sweden has increased so children are 73 times more likely to be raped before the age of 15 in Sweden now in 2010 than was the case when they banned spanking in 1979.
And Robert, you're saying there's a direct connection between those two things. You're totally confident. That's why that's happened.
No, I am not saying that. I don't think that increase. Actually, I do not think that increase is only due to the spanking ban. It's hard to tell what life is like across the Atlantic Ocean in a country with a different language that I don't know too much about. But the dots I see are that other kinds of negative consequences have also fallen into disfavor.
Sure.
And so at some point you start undermining appropriate parental discipline in the sense that's a backup spanking that enforces the positive teaching.
Let me bring in...
My research has shown that the combination, parents need both love and limits.
Right.
And we can't
Robert, let me just bring in something quite quickly here, because so many of the states in the US that have allowed spanking or for it to be legal in schools, a lot behind that is Bible and a sort of a biblical leading. So let me just quote you here from Proverbs 13:24. Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. Asada, what do you make of that as a reason why so many people in the US have had a spanking, have been spanked by their parents? The Bible was the background for that. That's the reason why, because it's in the Bible. What do you make of that?
Yeah, a lot of people use that, and I often say, number one, who wrote that? Because Christ did not write that, and these are Christians, not Solomon's. That's who wrote that, Solomon. So no, I'd rather be Christ-like and not Solomon-like. So let's get that out there. And then also, if they're referring to the rod that the shepherd had with the sheep, then he led the sheep with the rod. He guided them. He did not hit and beat the sheep with the rod. And so we have to be real careful about how we try and use the Bible to back up and justify our hitting children, because if you look historically, how was the Bible used, particularly with black folks in general? It was used in a way to control and as a way to say, you have ways that you are savage, you need to use these ways. And the Bible was used to enslave people, and that is a term, that is a proverb that we use all the time to justify how we treat children, and it's a problem. And I do want to say, even though this show is focused on how we do things in America, I looked at the stream's feed on Facebook and I saw a lot of brothers and sisters from Africa who had a similar viewpoint and saying like spanking helped us. They also said spare the rod, spoil the child. And I just want to make it clear that slavery and colonialism left a lot of scars. We got a lot of slavery and colonialism in our veins, and we need dialysis, like spiritual dialysis, to like get rid of this notion that hitting children creates good beings. It's like we didn't turn out fine. That's very average, and we need to be turned out exceptional. And that's going to take rearing our children with love, power, guidance, happiness, things that don't harm them. And the memories we leave in our children need to be good ones. They don't need to have memories of us bringing them pain. That's not the memory you should have of a parent, somebody that you lived in for 9 months. So yeah, we need to handle that.
Asada, I love that I love that you went through our feed, because I will share this tweet from Walter, who says, I'm from Zimbabwe. I was always spanked, and each time they would quote a Bible verse, spare the rod, spoil the child. But Femi, looking forward to our post show. There's something I want to share on Facebook from Lizzie. She says, I do smack my boys extremely occasionally. It's way less damaging than the frostbitten silence my mom inflicted on me. So it'd be interesting to talk about alternatives.
Right. And we have a lot more to talk about with Paul, with Robert, with Asada, and also with LaShawn, hopefully with you as well. If you would like to tweet Malika, it's not too late, #AJStream. And just to say, spare the rod, spoil the child, that is not actually in the Bible. You can go Google it. Trust me, it's not in the Bible. Okay, now I started a whole new debate. That could be a whole new show, couldn't it? On the next AJ Stream, we're going to take another look at allegations of sexual abuse and violence. They have ended the career of a popular radio host in Canada, and it's also reignited a controversial conversation about rape culture that we're tackled. But that will be on the next AJ Stream. For the moment though, you'll find us at stream.aljazeera.com in the post show. See you there. Hello again, this is the Stream's online post show. We're continuing our discussion on spanking children. Is it necessary or just cruel? Still with us, we have Paul Thomas. He's Associate Professor of Education at Furman University. We also have LaShawn Williams. She's a writer and social commentator. And Asada Kirkland is author of Beating Black Kids. And also Robert Lazalia is Professor of Human Development and Family Science at Oklahoma State University. Guests, did you notice that just as the conversation was taking off, I was wrapping up and saying that's all we have time for? Luckily though, we have a post show. I want to ask you something here. I found something on a wiki page, which is how to smack your child, and it takes you through certain steps. So this is the picture of a big tick saying this is the way to do it. Fully clothed on the fleshy part of the buttocks using your open hand. And then here's another picture here which shows you what a switch looks like. So I just want to go back to Robert. Are there techniques that if parents are going to smack their children that you would recommend that they use?
The only kind of corporal punishment shown to lead to worse outcomes in children than the kind of corporal punishment that has worse outcomes than alternatives is if it's used too severely, and that would include with the switch, or if it's the main discipline tactic. So then the parent isn't teaching things as well as providing some negative disciplinary consequences.
So it all works as far as you're concerned, as long as it's not too severe. You can do whatever method as long as you're not hurting the
other
child.
side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the only kind of spanking that's been shown to lead to better outcomes than alternatives.
Right.
Is what I refer to as backup spanking, which has these characteristics. It's non-abusive, like 2 or 3 swats with an open hand to the rear end. It's only used when children of about the ages of 2 to 6 respond defiantly to parents' attempts to use the milder discipline tactics that are being recommended here, such as disciplinary reasoning, or something milder like timeout. If a child still won't cooperate with that, then that's when a backup spanking that's non-abusive is appropriate, and that teaches the child to pay more attention to the reasoning, the positive part of discipline, and to cooperate with timeout so that spanking doesn't need to be used. That way of using spanking has shown to lead to significantly better outcomes than 10 out of 13 alternatives it's been compared with, and it's equal to the other 3.
LaShawn, there's another method here someone online is recommending. This is Emma on Twitter, and she says another method would be generally privileges gained or lost. It's a method that works. Discipline has to evolve with age and challenges. So LaShawn, I'm interested in what you think of that, but also personally, as someone who was occasionally swatted, when I would see my friends who I knew did not get spankings talk back to their parents or show disrespect, the thought among me and my sisters was, it's because they didn't get a spank. Does that ever happen to you? Has it happened to you where you are among your children's friends and see behavior that you think this is the best way to remedy that?
Well, my children are a little younger, so they're actually within the age range that Dr. Larzalier was speaking of, that 2 to 6 range. But I do remember that being younger as a child, particularly as a teenager, and seeing kids that I knew get away with things when I privileges of some sort. And I would say the same thing. It's because you're not getting a spanking, or you're not, getting privileges taken away. Because I do think that it's important, and I think it varies with the child. I think this is where being a parent requires you to be creative and to take the time to get to know your kid and how they respond to different things. Because you have to be creative in the way that you discipline them, whether it's spanking, whether it's taking away privileges, whether it's a timeout. But there has to be something. That's the reason you're a parent. Your job is to lead them and to guide them and to teach them.
I don't think that parents realize what's going on when they're actually hitting their children. There's a part of the brain called a regulatory part of the brain that makes decisions in times of adversity, and it develops around the age of 3 or 4. But if a child has stress in them from yelling or hitting or any type of stress, they call it toxic stress, then that part of the brain doesn't develop. So you have a young person growing up with no regulatory equipment. They're not making decisions based on the reason that you're trying to get them to understand. And so I don't think we understand what we're doing physiologically to our children. by hitting them, particularly before they're 4 years old, or like the range that the gentleman mentioned, from 2 to 6. So we really need to, like LaShawn said, be creative. But the creative part comes with being able to get a result without bringing them pain, but getting the result that you desire, them actually learning the lesson. If you remember Charlie Brown's teacher, she was the only adult in the whole cartoon, and all she did was go want, 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 want. That's what we sound like. So they're not really listening, especially if you hit you. If you punch me in my face right now, I'm not going to listen to you, and vice versa. I'm not even going to hear what you have to say. I'm going to be thinking about the fact that you just caused me some pain. So we really need to do things where they listen and retain what we say, based on an interest in what we say. Let's be interesting and not boring adults just spewing off what we think we have to say, but say it in a way that they can retain it, like it, and adhere to it because they want to adhere to it.
I just want to show
Can I jump in with this?
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with what he's saying is parents need to be creative, and they need to be creative in the mildest discipline tactic that's going to be, you want to prefer teaching. You want to prefer the most positive method you can use at any one time. But I don't know where this is in the brain, but the most common type of problem in 2 to 6 year old children is defiance. And if that isn't dealt with appropriately, then they aren't going to listen to any reasoning, and they're at risk to grow up to be criminals and delinquents. So it's only that defiance response to milder discipline tactic where, again, different things work for different kids, but spanking is, non-abusive spanking is an effective option for some kids that respond defiantly to milder discipline tactics.
So let me show you something here on my laptop here. These are the 19 states that allow for there to be corporal punishment in schools. One of the things that I noticed in the legislation, Paul, that kind of leapt out at me is that corporal punishment was allowed as long as it didn't leave a mark. What do you make of that?
That's a problem.
I think part of the problem is still it sort of feeds into the idea that there is an acceptable level, and I think that's really, again, that really baffles me compared to how we respond to adult behavior. That somehow there's an acceptable level, and again, I would say, how many adults are qualified to make the distinction between corporal punishment that will leave a mark and won't leave a mark? Once you find out where the line is, you've crossed the line. And again, it's all predicated on fear, and it's predicated on pain, and the situations that lead to spankings are generally volatile situations. Hitting a child just increases that. I was a high school teacher for 18 years. I've been a father for 25 years, and de-escalating, calming the situation down, I found is always preferable. So, spankings never do that. They always increase the antagonism before anything is resolved.
So,
Exactly.
Asada, you mentioned race earlier on in the conversation, and if you break it down as to who smacks, which group smacks the most, African Americans smack the most, and then a little behind that we have Latino parents, and then white parents, and then right at the bottom, Asian parents smack the least. Is it something that's different about the way we're all brought up in our various different communities, do you think?
Well, I mean, okay, so we're going to talk about America. If you're going to talk about America and how we were, this is the birth of this country. This country was birthed on violence, and violence of people, my people specifically, African Americans. And so even the discipline use, or I'm going to give you a whooping, I'm going to give you a whipping, like they're the same thing. They come from, it's from a slave experience that beating our children comes from. People, whether they agree or not, that's not the point. Just look at it. It's very simple. So I'm going to give you a whipping. Look at 12 years a slave. People, I'm going to discipline you, and that discipline comes from being told, telling a group, I'm going to discipline you so you don't do this again, and they whip people in front of them to near death. So for African Americans, we've perpetuated and internalized an experience as slaves, and I'm going to say throughout the African diaspora, when you look at colonialism, you see very similar tactics to chattel slavery in America, used in the Caribbean and in Africa. And so we've seemed to have taken that on. I call it the beloved syndrome, like in the movie Beloved, where Oprah kills the two kids when she sees the slave master coming. She prefers to kill them than to let them be at the hands of the slave master. Like, it's a very psychotic place to be, but bringing our children pain is nothing sane about it. And bringing our children pain doesn't make them better. even in the moment. I want us to really be in the moment with them when we're hitting them, and be in the moment with ourselves when we go to strike. Everybody's out of control at that point. And so it just takes a minute for the parent to chill out with their anger and think about ways to get the young people to acquiesce to what they're asking, but in a way that's sane and in a way that involves integrity, and in a way that there's a solution, so that the family really works together for a solution together.
So LaShawn, this Asada brought up a lot of history here in the reason why she was breaking down why different communities have corporal punishment and use it in different ways. Do you buy that?
I don't. Just for the simple fact that I think what really influences one's perspective on spanking is how it was applied in your life. And spanking has been around for centuries. Spanking occurred in Africa prior to colonialism and after colonialism. It's happened worldwide. It became popular during the Victorian era. So I think that, we can't always tie it to American chattel slavery. I think that, sure, in America you have the spare the rod, spoil the child that permeates through the African American community, but I don't see it as our spanking children as a direct reflection of that. I think it's simply something that we've adopted as a nation, and for some people it works. For others it doesn't. I think it's just another method of discipline that, as Dr. Leslier said, when used properly, is highly effective. And when we look at the Black community, the issues with us and spanking and the reasons that we seem to see these negative effects are the environments in which it occurs. The environment and the situations surrounding a spanking are what really make the difference in whether or not it's going to be effective or highly, highly negative, and help to push kids towards jail and towards violence. If you're in a violent situation, if you're in a frustrated, impoverished situation, then spanking is entirely different than it is when you're in a situation that is the opposite of that, when you come from the environment that closer to what I came from, which is a more affluent, educated environment in which there's less stress in the home, the financial situation's a little bit different. So I think when we start to look at the chaos that occurs in spanking, it's not that way in every single environment. That's not the experience for every Black person.
Okay.
So I think, All
right, so I'm going to leave it there for all of our guests, for Paul, for Asada, for Robert and LaShawn, and give the last word to our community. Malika.
Well, they will continue to debate online how effective spanking is or not, but I will give you two views that I've seen. Dupe on Twitter says the results are better if you engage children without that upper hand of being able to smack them into submission. And on the other hand, Kambaram on Twitter says, when I was younger, I hated it, but now I appreciate it, referring to spanking. He says it's like trimming rough edges.
Wow. So we've had 40 minutes of conversation all about to spank or not to spank. Guess we could keep going for another hour, I know that. So it just shows us that it's a classic debate that I don't think parents will ever be done with. Thank you so much for your time for the stream for today. Let me tell you about what we're going to be doing on the next AJ stream. Allegations of sexual abuse and violence have ended the career of a popular radio host in Canada. It's also reignited a controversial conversation about rape culture that we'll tackle on the next AJ stream. See you there.